Chapter 1426, It's not that I'm not good at it, I just don't like it. Lancelot had 2 attached support-type mutants, and each of them was very capable, which made Zhang Yi a little jealous. In particular, the ability of Green Knight Bowser could directly increase Lancelot's combat effectiveness by a large margin. For the time being, Zhang Yi didn't have a good way to break through Lancelot's defense, and could only choose to defend and wait and see for now. However, his defense was based on offense instead of defense. Zhang Yi and Flower exchanged glances. The tacit understanding between the man and the cat was enough, words were unnecessary. Zhang Yi attacked Lancelot from the left, and Flower attacked from the right, launching continuous attacks. Although their attacks were fierce, they could not harm the bodies of Bowser and Lancelot, and the bushes would continue to regenerate. You should know that even Nash Kingdom's general, Qinling Arc, was tortured to death by this move. Zhang Yi will not fall into the same situation. He is also very good at defense. After his attack was in vain, Zhang Yi chose to give up attacking and instead let the tree rush towards him. The dimensional gate opened wide, and soon the dense tree rushes directly into the interior of Zhang Yi's dimensional gate. Space-related supernatural powers. Pure physical attacks are difficult to use effectively, but there are limits to their defensive capabilities. Lancelot silently mouthed the information he had learned about Zhang Yi. The next moment, his left hand pressed against the sword in the tree. Black flames burned fiercely, rushing towards Zhang Yi along countless vines in an instant. Fallen sky ember flames. The flames came along the vines and instantly arrived in front of Zhang Yi, entering his dimensional space. Zhang Yi suddenly felt a special force begin to erode his space. This flame is unusual. Zhang Yi's eyes flashed, but instead of immediately cutting off the tree grove, he continued to let it pour into his own dimensional space. He had mastered 3,000 of the same dimensional spaces. Therefore, he did not mind sacrificing one of the spaces to gain insight into the opponent's abilities. At the same time, he swung his holy judgment, severing a large number of vines, which he then collected in his dimensional space. First, we need to confirm whether plants that have left their bodies are still alive and whether they can reproduce like real trees. Zhang Yi looked up. At this moment, he was surrounded on all sides, already wrapped in vines burning with the black flames of hell. They were scrambling to pour into Zhang Yi's dimensional gate, and Zhang Yi could not even see what was happening outside. However, with his defensive power, it would take at least 16 hours for this hellfire to completely break through his defenses of the gate of 3,000 dimensions at this rate. In the short term, there is no need to worry about the defense being broken. Moreover, the supernatural power within his body simply cannot support him in continuously attacking for 16 hours. Zhang Yi felt very confident. As long as his defense did not break, he would be invincible. Divine Destruction. Zhang Yi directly activated his ability, shattering all the vines in front of him. Together with Flower, he continued to attack Lancelot from the left and right. Neither of them got close, and even Flower, a feline, who is strong in close combat, fired high-energy particle beams from a distance. However, in the face of this level of attack, Lancelot was not affected at all. He was able to block them all with the help of the sword in the tree. He knew that Zhang Yi had not used his full power either. Neither of them dared to reveal too many of their cards before they knew the other party's true capabilities. They would parry each other's attacks, and wait until they understood the other's true abilities before delivering the decisive blow. This was the safest way to fight. Lancelot raised the sword in the tree in his right hand and said indifferently, "I have heard of the name Absolute Defense. It is said that so far, no one has been able to break through your defense, and no one has even been able to make you bleed. I'm quite interested in that." A flash of illusory light appeared in his hand as the sword in the tree, transformed by his supernatural powers into the Sword of Conquest Conqueror, merged with it. In this world, there is no impregnable fortress. Conquerors exist to break down seemingly impregnable fortresses. Lancelot's strongest attack was contained within the sword. After fusing with the sword in the tree, he has reached an astonishing level of attack and defense. At this moment, he attacks, Zhang Yi defends. Lancelot rushes towards Zhang Yi from the trees like lightning. The sword in his hand expands, and countless vines coalesce into a large sword, like a deformed monster, but inexplicably giving off a heavy oppressive force. A monstrous black flame burned around him, and the 666 mark on his face twisted strangely. Then came a simple, unadorned slash, heading straight for Zhang Yi, who was protected by the gate of 3,000 dimensions. As the slash fell, flames erupted from the depths of hell, and Zhang Yi even saw a huge demon's head grinning behind Lancelot. The Sword of Conquest, Conqueror, has the attribute of breaking defenses. When it made contact with Zhang Yi's dimensional gate, there was no sound. Only in the depths of another dimension did an earth-shattering explosion occur. With one slash, the 7-dimensional gates were directly shattered. But beneath the dark flames, Zhang Yi also revealed a smile. If you hadn't done that, how would you have come before me in person? Without close combat, Zhang Yi would have difficulty breaking through the defense of the sword in the tree, and Lancelot would not be able to slash Zhang Yi's dimensional gate. But in close combat, both sides have a fighting chance. Condense the power of the void. Zhang Yi unsheathed his sword. The power of the void had long been condensed within the hilt of the sword, so when the horizontal sword was unsheathed, it was like releasing a demon, as the surging power of the void gushed out frantically, distorting even the space around Zhang Yi. Good at defense but not at attack? That was in the past. He just didn't like it. But not liking it and not being able to do it are not the same thing. Lancelot's sword cleaved through his 7-dimensional gates, and Zhang Yi slashed at his body with a diagonal slash. The incredible power that exploded within a short distance made Lancelot look a little shocked as well. According to the intelligence, this guy isn't just good at defense, and his offensive power is lower than his ability index? In a hurry, all he could do was raise the guardian shield in his hand. The long sword slammed into his protective shield like a black moon, and the impact caused the entire palace to start shaking violently. Crack! Lancelot's protective shield cracked with a loud noise, and he was thrown away by the enormous force. However, soon afterwards, the vines growing behind him caught his body. Humph! Lancelot grunted, and his misjudgment of Zhang Yi's attack power had caused him to suffer from not insignificant injuries. However, Gawain soon healed his internal injuries and restored him to perfect fighting form. Chapter 1427, A Master's Move to Compete. Zhang Yi and Lancelot's initial head-on collision saw Zhang Yi slightly gain the upper hand, but this advantage was quickly erased by Gawain's healing abilities. The two men felt that they were both at a disadvantage against each other's abilities and knew that they had encountered a tough opponent. In Zhang Yi's right eye, the light distorted, and divine destruction was quickly activated, destroying all the huge vines that tried to approach him. After avoiding the vines from spreading to his own dimensional space, it brought fallen sky ember flames to corrode his dimensional space. He wouldn't give Lancelot the slightest chance. After the attack, Lancelot's gaze became much more cautious. Absolute defense is not just empty talk. He gives me the feeling of a warrior wearing thousands of layers of armor. Only by using the strongest attack, the Sword of Conquest, do I have a chance to break through his defenses, but I only managed to destroy 7 layers of space doors. But it seems that this is nothing to him. However, he also has the opportunity to attack me. The one who strikes first is more likely to reveal their weaknesses. I see. Zhang Yi was not calm inside. A slash like the one just now could only be performed by condensing void power, which meant that it was also a limited skill for him and could not be used indefinitely. If they really fought head-on, he was definitely no match for Lancelot. But fortunately, his gates of 3,000 dimensions gave him enough room to maneuver. By my own ability, the possibility of winning against this guy in front of me is less than 20%. His 2 support abilities are too tricky. However, the possibility of me losing is less than 5%, and the possibility of him breaking through my defense is extremely low. The battle that broke out between the two opponents, who both had both offensive and defensive capabilities and superb combat awareness, was undoubtedly an AO battle whose outcome no one could predict. However, no matter what the two sides were thinking inside, the battle would not stop for even a moment. Zhang Yi and Flower split up and attack Lancelot from the left and right, so that neither of them has time to think of a countermeasure. Lancelot swings his sword in the tree around, destroying huge swathes of the forest, which then regenerates with his power, as he frantically fights Zhang Yi and Flower for space in the palace. If my opponent only had chaos, I could relax some of my defenses and use absolute defense to break through his defenses first. But there's also a tricky feline next to me. Although it poses no mortal danger to me, once I focus all my attention on chaos, it definitely has a chance to kill me. What a nuisance. Boom! Flower unleashed a huge high-energy particle beam that shot towards Lancelot. Lancelot was not fazed, and swung his giant sword downwards, sending the fallen sky ember flames spreading wildly. But just as he was about to kill Flower with his mind, Zhang Yi, who was in the opposite direction, decisively seized the opportunity, withdrew his long sword, and slashed at him fiercely. A huge black blade of light, like a crescent moon, slashed down from the ceiling and split open his head. Lancelot had to divert his energy and once again summoned a large number of vines to act as a buffer. The layers of huge vines hard consumed the power of Zhang Yi's sword. But soon, the ground beneath Flora let out a crisp sound. She looked down with a fixed gaze, and the white floor beneath her instantly shattered. Hundreds of green vines came at her body like poisonous snakes. Barrier stones have the effect of resisting the impact of supernatural powers, but the growth of plants can leave scars on the hardest of substances. Flower's fur immediately stood on end, and the entire cat turned into a black hedgehog, with every hair standing up like steel needles. The vines cut across his body, almost cutting it open, and large patches of steel needles fell to the ground with a clanking sound. Flower was enraged, and let out a breath of anger towards Lancelot. Zhang Yi once again inserted the holy judgment into its sheath, and the power of the void began to gather, taking the stance of drawing a sword. Lancelot had captured Zhang Yi's change in attack power through that blow. His powerful slashes require him to build up his strength before he can release them, and every time he uses them, his strength will be weakened for a period of time. Therefore, we only need to seize the gap between his attacks to break his defense. Having grasped this, Lancelot's smile at the corner of his mouth became much stronger. Sword in the tree exploded into pieces of forest, slowing down the dual attacks of Zhang Yi and Flower. By the time the power approached Lancelot, a significant portion of its lethality had been eliminated, and the rest was unable to pass through his shield of protection. Even if he was injured, Gawain was able to quickly heal him of all non-fatal injuries. The Trinity was an almost impervious combination. On the contrary, Zhang Yi's mobility was greatly restricted due to the small area of the Holy Spirit Temple and the barrier restricting his ability to use Space Shuffle. As a result, his most prized long-range attack method was also unable to be used. Zhang Yi's expression grew increasingly grave. At this moment, he already sensed that the situation was developing in an unfavorable direction for him. At that moment, Lancelot had already taken advantage of the cover of the trees to quickly come towards him. Zhang Yi did not hesitate. His right index finger pointed forward like a pistol, and a void sphere condensed between his fingers, quickly turning into a huge black void ball that spiraled towards the front and impacted. Boom! 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 The sword in the tree rapidly expanded, extending countless vines that instantly blocked Zhang Yi's line of sight. The violent fluctuations in space even made it impossible for Zhang Yi to quickly confirm Lancelot's location. Zhang Yi realized Lancelot's objective. In an area that was not particularly large in the first place, Lancelot, who was more powerful in close combat, could use the trees to get close to Zhang Yi. In the first collision, he seemed to have suffered at the hands of Zhang Yi, but at the same time, he also obtained information about Zhang Yi's melee combat. Then for the second time, he must have come prepared. Sure enough, as Zhang Yi expected, a huge opening suddenly appeared in the tree above his right, and the figure of Lancelot appeared from it. His body was burning with the terrifying fallen sky ember flames, and the combined form of the Sword of Conquest in his right hand and the sword in the tree exuded a powerful pressure of supernatural power, slashing fiercely towards Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi quickly gripped the long sword in its sheath with his right hand. His swordplay was already considered relatively skilled, but according to Liang Yu, when facing a true master, it was best not to choose to fight head-on. But in order to preserve his life, he always needed to practice some special moves to use against his enemies at critical moments. He may not be good at playing with swords, but he is extremely skilled at the one-handed sword drawing technique, combined with the condensed the void power charging attack. So when faced with Lancelot's surprise attack, Zhang Yi suddenly drew his sword and slashed at him. Chapter 1428, Every Second Counts. Fallen sky ember flames against condensed the void. The pitch-black color almost swallowed up all the light in the room, and the surging power made people feel a shudder from the soul even before it touched. Flower was not idle in the other direction. It sensed the moment Lancelot appeared near Zhang Yi. Meow! It roared, its body suddenly expanding, and thick black spikes erupted from its body, all shooting at Lancelot's back. Facing Zhang Yi and Flower's combined attack, Lancelot's face revealed a crazed smile. He even used one hand to hold his sword and shield, using the other to summon a shield to block the attack from Flower. With just one hand, he went head-to-head with Zhang Yi's sword. The moment the powerful forces collided, even the palace, which was made of barrier stones, began to shake violently. The magnitude of the tremor was so great that even the entire massive Holy Spirit Temple reacted. At this moment, in the gallery at the entrance to the palace, Gao Changkong, with Gu Man and Chen Xiaozheng, frowned slightly. Why are they fighting? However, soon, he smiled indifferently. It doesn't matter, there was always going to be a day like this. After saying that, he slowly walked forward, his long shadow trailing behind him like a huge shade. And directly in front of him, the guardian of the Holy Spirit Temple, the General Babu, sat steadily in his chair, as if waiting for his arrival. Lancelot fought Zhang Yi and Flower with all his strength. The power of this blow was so strong that it sent him flying, and his arms felt a little numb. But physical problems never needed to worry about him. Before Gawain's energy ran out and he died, his body would not show any minor wounds. His body hung upside down from the ceiling, head down, feet up, staring at Zhang Yi with a crazed, hideous smile on his lips. Are you ready? The show has just begun. As soon as he finished speaking, he fell straight towards Zhang Yi like a bullet. Zhang Yi frowned, and the dimensional gate of everything under heaven appeared in front of him. The fluctuations in space were, to Lancelot, as clear as a stone dropped into a lake. He could certainly feel the existence of the dimensional gate, but he was not afraid, and he even chose to dive headfirst into the dimensional gate. However, Zhang Yi's face did not show the slightest hint of joy, because less than a second later, one of the dimensional gates directly exploded because it could not withstand Lancelot's power. Lancelot's figure appeared, and he once again launched an attack on Zhang Yi. This guy. Zhang Yi did not expect that Lancelot would be able to see his attack methods so quickly. During the gap period after releasing the Void skill, he will be unable to launch powerful and effective attack methods, and can only rely on the dimensional gate for defense. The gate of 3,000 dimensions is the result of Zhang Yi splitting his own space in order to diversify risks. In doing so, he avoids the risk of being completely exposed to the enemy due to the collapse of the dimensional gate. However, the price of doing so is that the tolerance threshold of each space will be lowered, and it will be broken by the enemy one by one. When facing an enemy with a powerful attack, this would lead to the current problem. Lancelot, like a demon from hell, was covered in a terrifying black flame as he raised his sword and grinned, aiming it at Zhang Yi's dimensional gate and slashing. 1 slash, 2 slashes, 3 slashes. With his absolute power unleashed, he could launch tens of thousands of furious attacks in a short moment. It wouldn't take long to destroy a dimensional gate. Of course, Zhang Yi wouldn't let him do this. After 13 dimensional gates were destroyed, his power gap was also restored. Lancelot, who was watching and wanted to slash through all the dimensional gates in front of him like crazy, in order to drag him out from under the Umber. He raised the guardian shield in his left hand, a small, unassuming cross-shaped knight shield, which suddenly burst into a strange black light. The cross-shaped symbol on it became even more obvious, as if it were blasphemy against the gods. Black light emerged from the guardian shield and transformed into a hemispherical energy field, blocking in front of Lancelot. Divine Destruction's power could only be withstood at this distance, there was no way to avoid it. The impact was so strong that the light of his shield dimmed and he was sent flying. Boom! This time, Lancelot broke countless vines, but he was ultimately slammed into the wall. But as I said before, as long as Gawain was not killed, his injuries would not matter. Unlike Shokir, Gawain was not a doctor, but more of a provider, using her supernatural powers and even her life to heal another. After Lancelot's injuries were healed, he let out a crazed grin and swept towards Zhang Yi again like a gust of wind. Your kind of attack takes at least 5 seconds to regain your strength, which is probably the drawback of defensive mutants. But my attacks don't need any time. Zhang Yi said coldly, what are you pretending for? Without that vegetable enhancing your defensive attributes, you would have been beaten into a pig's head long ago. Lancelot's giant sword slashed down. As a warrior, don't make excuses for your failures. Winning is everything. This time, he once again slashed Zhang Yi's 16-dimensional gates to pieces. Even if Zhang Yi and Flower used all their strength to fight back, it was clear that in this situation, they had no advantage at all, with 2 against 3. They were even at a disadvantage. At this rate, I can only hold out for another 10 minutes before I have to flee in defeat. Zhang Yi muttered to himself. If all the gates of 3,000 dimensions were to be destroyed, Zhang Yi's abilities would be greatly affected. It would take at least a day to regain the use of dimensional space. At that time, he might not even be able to defeat the weakest Epsilon, and would be in grave danger here and now. But fortunately, I am not lacking in helpers. Zhang Yi took a deep breath. After a period of time, he finally got the result he wanted. The vines of the sword in the tree that he had cut off and placed in a dimensional space died quickly and did not continue to grow. This meant that Bowser could not invade Zhang Yi's space through the vines extending from the sword in the tree. Zhang Yi transferred a piece of the vine into the shadows and said to Zhokir, now, analyze what this thing really is. Is it human tissue or plant tissue? Chapter 1429 Your sword is my sword. There were many people in Spirit Guardian's shadow space. Although they could not appear on the scene to assist Zhang Yi in fighting Hua Hua, they were all waiting for their moment to make a difference. Shokir took out her equipment as soon as possible to study the tissue structure of the sword in the tree. With the help of Lucarin, she quickly obtained the results of her analysis. The human cell structure has completely disappeared, retaining less than 5% of the characteristics of animal cells. Cell walls and chloroplasts have even been born, almost completely transforming it into a plant. Zhang Yi watched as Lancelot furiously attacked his dimensional gate, while pondering his means against his enemy. Instead, his gaze fell on the sword in the tree in Lancelot's right hand. Zhang Yi could not find a weakness in Lancelot's true form for the time being. Lancelot's abilities were very comprehensive, with both offensive and defensive capabilities. Then he could only start with his 2 supporting mutants. The Green Knight Bowser, who had completely transformed into the sword in the tree, had extended trees from his body, which obviously had no pain nerves, otherwise Zhang Yi and Flower would not have been allowed to cause so much damage. In his current state, he probably Lancelot retreated very quickly, and the emerald green sword in the tree in his hand rapidly expanded, with a large number of branches several meters thick spanning the distance between him and Zhang Yi and Flower. Zhang Yi knew that he would defend, but that didn't matter. He drew the holy judgment from its sheath, and the power of the void slashed madly in Lancelot's direction like a torrent. Flower also opened its mouth wide, maximizing the power of its breath. The combined attack of the two epsilons slammed into the overlapping tree trunks, and even Lancelot had to use 120% of his energy to block such a blow. At this moment, a beautiful girl in black combat fatigues slowly emerged from the shadows behind Zhang Yi. Yang Xinxin stood next to Zhang Yi. She gently raised her right hand, and the Angel of Desire with 6 wings immediately drew back her longbow. A scarlet feather transformed into an arrow and shot forward. "Be loyal to me, and do not harm me or my brother." The second arrow was black, an arrow of abomination. Abomination, rejection, betrayal, harm your current master. Yang Xinxin's sudden appearance gave Lancelot a bad feeling. But he didn't know much about Zhang Yi's abilities, and he had no information at all about Mu Yan, Yang Xinxin, and the others. The trees grew wildly, blocking the arrow's path. Although he didn't know how powerful it was, Lancelot was confident in the dual defense of the sword in the tree and his own guardian shield. However, the arrow only floated into the green tree trunk. Zhang Yi stared expectantly at Lancelot's right hand. The huge and clumsy body is the perfect target in the face of Xinxin's power. "I just don't know if the arrow that has pierced the extended branches will affect Bowser's body." Before Zhang Yi could finish his self-talk, a sudden change occurred a moment after the arrow pierced the tree. The tree that had almost completely covered the palace suddenly started to retract with a rumble. Shock flashed in Lancelot's eyes. He looked at Bowser, who was connected to his right hand, and said, "Bowser, what's wrong with you?" Once the connection is established, the sword in the tree will be controlled by the user's will and manipulated freely. But he suddenly felt that the connection between him and Bowser had been severed. There were only 2 possibilities: either Bowser was dead, or, alternatively, Bowser had taken control of his body on his own initiative. The next moment, the sword in the tree on Lancelot's arm suddenly sprang up. A towering tree grew wildly from Lancelot's arm and pointed countless thorns at Lancelot's body, which pierced him fiercely. Lancelot did not expect to be attacked by Bowser. For a moment, his body was fiercely hit by the thorns. If not for the Guardian Shield, which came into play at the critical moment, he would have been pierced directly by the thorns. Even so, the vines grew wildly, trying to wrap around Lancelot's body and strangle him. "Bowser, what are you doing?" Lancelot ripped Bowser off his arm and threw him hard into the distance. He quickly realized that Bowser's abnormality was related to the sudden appearance of Yang Xinxin. He stared hard at Yang Xinxin, an ability user who can mesmerize people. Yang Xinxin's mouth curled up into a strange smile, "But you're not the only one who's brought help." Lancelot's heart grew a little restless. Having lost the sword in the tree, his combat effectiveness would also be affected. But even so, he still had Gawain, and with 2 against 2, they could still fight. However, the next scene that happened immediately afterwards caused his heart to sink directly. Because he saw Bowser slowly crawling towards Zhang Yi, and then attaching itself to Zhang Yi's arm. The power of the rules category is absolute. After being hit by Yang Xinxin's arrows, they will all become her slaves and obey the orders she gives. So Yang Xinxin ordered Bowser to help Zhang Yi attack Lancelot. Bowser made the best choice, which was to become the sword in Zhang Yi's hand. Zhang Yi did not refuse. He had seen the power of Bowser. This plant-based ability, which can be infinitely regenerated as long as energy is provided, is extremely difficult to deal with and has both offensive and defensive capabilities. The vines wrapped tightly around Zhang Yi's body and began to absorb the supernatural energy within him. At the same time, a wonderful feeling arose in Zhang Yi's mind, as if an extra arm had grown, or as if many fingers had sprouted from the palm of his hand. He could control the sword in the tree as he pleased. This feels great. Zhang Yi took the supernatural energy supplement from dimensional space and put it in his mouth. The next moment, he looked at the gloomy Lancelot in front of him, and the vines on his right hand quickly grew, turning into a huge green long sword. Now, your sword is mine. Zhang Yi raised his right hand, aiming the sword in the tree at Lancelot, and countless spiked vines wildly stabbed at him. Chapter 1430, Brothers in Arms, Loved Ones. The sword in the tree fell into Zhang Yi's hands and turned into a sharp blade pointing at Lancelot. That weapon, which could instantly transform into a large forest, was both offensive and defensive. In an instant, it was like a storm of rain and pear blossoms, with thousands of sharp, pointed vines stabbing at Lancelot. Lancelot gritted his teeth, his face so gloomy that it looked like water was about to drip from it. He knew the power of the sword in the tree, so he quickly dodged the barrage of attacks. But after a moment, the attacks came in an unstoppable stream. Fallen sky ember flames. The sword of conquest burned with a blazing flame that swept in all directions, burning away a large number of the vines. But this kind of damage could not harm the root of the sword in the tree at all. As long as the main body exists, it can regenerate infinitely. So immediately afterwards, even more vines attacked him. Spikes and thorns, vines and twigs, the luxuriant trees occupied almost all the space in front of him. It was only when this once mighty sword fell into the hands of another that Lancelot felt just how difficult it was to deal with. Zhang Yi and Flower did not idle, attacking him at the same time and launching fierce attacks. In the short span of a few seconds, Lancelot was attacked tens of thousands of times. He had to raise his power to the maximum. Knight of Hell who has fallen into the netherworld, let my blood stain the flag of rebellion against heaven. When the angel's broken wings fall to the ground, I will sing the hymn of doom from a torn throat. Lancelot chanted the knight's hymn to Hell, which greatly enhanced his power, in order to resist the joint attack of Zhang Yi and Flower. However, there was no way to destroy the sword in the tree, and now it was even becoming difficult to get close to Zhang Yi's body. On the contrary, Zhang Yi, who had obtained the sword in the tree, was very comfortable, excitedly controlling the sword in the tree to attack him. This plant weapon that could be controlled with just one's thoughts was simply perfect. Lancelot, admit defeat. I can spare your life, but you must apologize to me properly and hand over the notebook. Zhang Yi said. Although he was now in an absolute dominant position, killing Lancelot would also be extremely costly. Right now, this was not the time to risk his life. Lancelot heard this and clenched his teeth in anger. He swung his giant sword, which was burning with black flames, and swept it horizontally, turning to ashes all the vines within hundreds of meters in front of him. He also realized that continuing the fight would give him no chance of victory. Without the sword in the tree, there was no way he could win against Zhang Yi and Flower with only 1 against 2. I can give you the notes, but you have to give me back Bowser, Lancelot said. Zhang Yi's mouth curled up into a smile at this. He looked at the sword in the tree in his hands. This weapon was surprisingly useful, and he didn't want to give it back to Lancelot. There was no reason to give back something that had already been obtained. However, Bowser is not just a weapon. He is a member of the Knights of the Round Table, a real person. So Zhang Yi said, I can give it back to you, but not until we leave the Nash Kingdom. Lancelot's eyes darkened. He is my brother, my loved ones, and if you dare to harm him, the Knights of the Round Table will never let you live in peace. Zhang Yi's mouth curled up. That's scary, he really scared him. However, he could also feel that Bowser meant a great deal to Lancelot. Such a mutant, who could transform into a powerful weapon, was hard to find in the world. Don't worry. The time we have to control him is limited, and your brother will not obediently submit to me. I just need to keep him here as a hostage for now. Do you understand? Zhang Yi's gaze was a little impatient. If you don't agree, then the two of us will fight to the death here. I'm just informing you. Do you really think I'm negotiating with you? These words made Lancelot's face look terrible. If they continued to fight, he would definitely be the one to suffer, and he might even die at Zhang Yi's hands. Lancelot gritted his teeth and stared at him, saying, "Fine, let's temporarily call a truce. But remember, you are not allowed to lay a finger on Bowser." Yang Xinxin's ability to control. The attributes of the sword in the tree were too good, and Zhang Yi couldn't bear to part with it, but he was also a real person. It would be difficult to recruit such a guy, and even if he was recruited, Zhang Yi would not feel particularly at ease. If he turns against him in battle, he could end up getting stabbed like Lancelot. Yang Xinxin's eyes dropped. That's easy. Just turn him into a tool with no free will. Preserve his life, erase his individual will, and turn him into an empty shell. I mean, it's not hard to make him a brain-dead vegetable. Yang Xinxin spoke casually, but what she said was a very frightening thing. Can this be done? Zhang Yi asked curiously. Shou Qi gave Zhang Yi the answer. This can be done using drugs. Zhang Yi nodded, very good. Lancelot indeed obediently handed over the sage's notes. After learning that Bowser had been captured, the members of the Knights of the Round Table looked at Zhang Yi and the others with even more resentment. But they had to admit that Zhang Yi's team was strong enough that even they were not sure they could defeat them. Especially since Zhang Yi always carried around his space with him, and no one knew how many mutants with special abilities Zhang Yi had brought with him. Don't forget what you said. After we leave here, you must return Bowser. Lancelot said, glaring at Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi shrugged, don't worry, but you'll also have to prepare a large ransom. Next, we should go find Gao Changkong. His gaze pierced through the layers of palaces and looked into the distance. If I'm not wrong, that guy has long since anticipated everything that will happen at this moment. He's already one step ahead of us. Gao Changkong's ability, reincarnation theory, can predict what will happen in the future with a relatively high degree of accuracy. Although it is inferior to Zhang Yi's time ability, Gao Changkong's ability is still quite accurate. However, it basically does not err in the general direction. Using this ability, he can perform countless simulations in his mind to find the path to the doors of the Holy Spirit Temple.